The text came through while I was helping a customer at my boutique. It read, "I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account." Ha ha! My hands didn't shake as I read it. My voice didn't falter as I helped Mrs. Peterson select a scarf. The only visible reaction to my husband of 12 years nuking our marriage via text was a slight tightening around my eyes. Once Mrs. Peterson left, purchase wrapped in our signature silver paper, I typed a reply. "Good luck. My name is Claire. I'm 38 years old, and as of today, I hold the record for the most callous goodbye in history." While Mark, my soon-to-be ex-husband, was likely gloating over his grand exit, imagining me sobbing over his betrayal, I was calmly locking up the boutique for the evening. The signs had been there for months. Late nights at work that didn't align with his pay stubs, sudden password changes on his phone, his obsession with the gym and expensive new clothes, all designed to reclaim a youth long past. 3 months ago, I found a receipt for a romantic dinner for 2 at a restaurant he couldn't afford on his salary. That was the night I opened my own bank account and began moving my savings. A week later, when Mark suggested combining our finances to simplify things, I smiled and agreed. I left just enough in the joint account to avoid suspicion, 2 months' worth of deposits. The rest went to a safer place, along with a growing collection of evidence, credit card charges, hotel receipts, and suspicious texts. My phone buzzed again. "Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later." Melissa, the receptionist at his office. I'd met her once at the company Christmas party, a woman who laughed too loud at Mark's jokes and touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. She was 22, naive enough to believe she was special. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my lawyer. "It's time," I said. "He just made his move," she replied. The papers were ready. Everything was ready. I spent the rest of that evening in what Mark used to call my little house, which, in reality, was my house, the one I'd inherited from my grandmother and kept in my name alone. Mark had suggested adding his name to the deed countless times over the years, claiming it was just practical. I'd always smiled, nodded, and done nothing. Now that instinct felt like another win in my quiet game of preparation. As I organized the paperwork my lawyer would need, I came across our wedding album. Mark looked so different in those photos, back when he still resembled a man who understood loyalty. His current wardrobe, shirts too tight for his softening middle and jeans that screamed midlife crisis, was almost laughable in comparison. My phone buzzed again. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy." I laughed out loud. My little shop, the boutique I'd built from scratch, now made more money than his middle management position ever had. The shop was my pride and joy, and, thanks to careful planning, completely separate from our joint finances. The idea that Mark thought I'd be devastated without him, or his half-hearted paycheck, was hilarious. I poured myself a glass of the good wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. While Mark likely imagined me crying over our wedding photos, I was reveling in my ability to protect what mattered most. Tomorrow, Mark would leave for Miami, thinking he'd won. By morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop with his texts. "What did you do to our credit card?" "The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel canceled our reservation. Answer me." I'd spent the previous evening canceling his little getaway. A quick call to the credit card company, armed with his incriminating texts about booking flights and hotels with the joint card, was all it took. Fraudulent charges were reversed, and his cards were frozen. When his mother, Barbara, called later that day, I wasn't surprised. "Claire, Mark told us everything," she started. "How controlling you've been, how you drove him to this. He says you're being vindictive now, ruining his travel plans." I put her on speaker as I worked on a window display. "Did he mention emptying our joint account?" I asked, adding a final touch to the arrangement. Silence. "Well, he said he didn't have a choice, considering how distant you've been. He told us about your coldness, Claire." I smiled. "Barbara, I have his texts admitting to it. Would you like me to read them to you?" Another pause. "He did seem a little cruel," she admitted. I told him that text message was inappropriate. A little cruel? I'd call it something else entirely, but thanks for your input, Barbara. My lawyer has advised me to keep minimal contact with Mark and his family during this process, so I think it's best we end this call now. By the afternoon, Mark's sister Amanda had joined the chaos. She'd always been the family gossip, and her latest updates were the icing on the cake. Apparently, Mark and Melissa are stuck in a budget motel near the airport, Amanda relayed gleefully. He maxed out his credit cards months ago. Melissa's been posting on social media about how adventurous their love story is. It's a lot. I was amused but unsurprised. Mark had always been great at playing the role of the victim, but now he was getting a taste of reality. Later that day, my lawyer called with an update. The emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday, she said. Given his admissions in those texts, we'll be freezing the remaining joint assets. Do you want him served now or in Miami? Serve him where he is, I replied, imagining the scene at that dingy motel. Oh, and Melissa's social media posts are providing excellent evidence. She's quite enthusiastic. I chuckled, thinking of how their adventure was falling apart before it even began. My phone buzzed again. You think you're so smart, but I have copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half of that business is mine. I forwarded his message to my lawyer. She responded within minutes. Let him learn about separate assets the hard way. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic, it's just being prepared. Monday arrived, and so did the emergency hearing. I dressed the part. Sharp, professional, confident. Mark showed up wearing what I can only describe as his best attempt at looking young and hip. Tight designer jeans that didn't suit his age, a blazer that looked like it belonged to someone else, and an expression that teetered between smugness and panic. Melissa wasn't with him, and I could only imagine the strain of their adventure had started to show. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with the sharpest instincts I'd ever encountered, walked me through the process before we entered the courtroom. Let him talk, she advised with a knowing smirk. The more he says, the worse he'll make it for himself. And she was right. Mark's lawyer, who seemed hastily hired and utterly unprepared, opened with a weak attempt to paint me as vindictive and calculating. My client admits to some rash decisions, his lawyer began, but Mrs. Harrison's actions have been cruel. She's intentionally withholding shared assets and disrupting his financial stability. My lawyer didn't even flinch. Your Honor, let's talk about those rash decisions, she said smoothly. She presented Mark's texts with almost theatrical precision. The admission of emptying our joint account, his use of the joint credit card for personal travel, and his outright gloating about it. Mark squirmed in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. The judge addressed him directly. Mr. Harrison, do you deny using shared funds for this personal escapade? Mark stammered. I wanted to make a clean break. By committing financial fraud? The judge asked, raising an eyebrow. Mark's lawyer attempted to pivot, claiming he was entitled to part of my boutique because it had grown during our marriage. The business flourished due to my client's moral support, his lawyer argued. My lawyer didn't miss a beat. Moral support? Like these text messages where he called her business a little shop or dismissed it as a hobby, she asked, holding up printed screenshots. The boutique was established before the marriage, and my client maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. The judge nodded, flipping through the documentation we'd provided, the deed to the house, the boutique's incorporation papers, the detailed financial records. It all painted a clear picture. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct. All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Harrison is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. Failure to do so will result in further legal action. Mark tried to protest, but the money's gone. We spent it on. The judge cut him off. Then I suggest you find a way to replace it. Outside the courtroom, Mark's attempts to salvage his dignity fell flat. You've ruined me, he hissed as we passed each other. I'll have to move back in with my parents. I stopped, looked him square in the eye, and replied, No, Mark. You ruined yourself. I just made sure you couldn't ruin me too. His mother was waiting in the parking lot, arms crossed and visibly irritated. Honestly, Mark, what were you thinking? I heard her scolding him as they walked away. I left the courthouse with my heels clicking confidently against the marble floors, ready to move forward. The fallout began almost immediately. Mark's attempts to claim the boutique as his idea were laughably weak. His accusations that he'd been my business partner were disproven in minutes, thanks to my meticulous records. He's getting desperate, my lawyer told me during a call, and his girlfriend's social media isn't helping. She's airing out their drama for the world to see. Apparently, Melissa had realized the adventure wasn't what she'd signed up for. Living in a cramped studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't afford his own place wasn't exactly glamorous. Her posts shifted from gushing about new beginnings to vague complaints about toxic relationships. By the end of the week, she'd removed all mention of Mark from her profiles. Mark's family started reaching out, their tone markedly different from before. "We had no idea," his sister Amanda admitted during an unexpected visit to the boutique. "He told us you were cold and controlling, but after seeing those texts, we're ashamed we believed him." Even Barbara, who had been quick to call me controlling, was apologetic. "The things he said about your age," she said during a tearful voicemail, "about replacing you with someone younger. I thought I raised him better." I let their messages go to voicemail. Their support might have meant something weeks ago, but now? It just felt like damage control. Meanwhile, the boutique thrived. Women came in specifically to support me, many sharing their own stories of betrayal or resilience. "My ex tried to take everything too," one customer confided, buying a designer handbag. "Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them." Mark had underestimated me, and now he was facing the consequences. The weeks following the emergency hearing were a whirlwind. My boutique's sales hit an all-time high, thanks to a surge of community support. Customers came in with words of encouragement, and gossip about Mark's situation only seemed to fuel their loyalty. Meanwhile, Mark's life was unraveling. His attempts to claw back any semblance of control in the divorce were laughable. He filed petition after petition, claiming everything from unfair distribution to emotional distress, but the court wasn't buying it. He actually argued that his text about emptying the account was a joke, my lawyer said during one update call, laughing. The judge asked him if haha made theft less illegal. Mark's career wasn't faring much better. His company, already wary of his relationship with Melissa, conducted a quiet investigation. The result? A formal reprimand and a stalled promotion. He tried to claim age discrimination, Amanda told me during another unexpected visit to the boutique. HR just added that complaint to his file. Hearing about his spiral might have given me some satisfaction, but by then, I was too busy thriving to focus on his chaos. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I opened a second boutique location. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Mark was struggling to rebuild his life, the little shop he'd belittled was expanding. I hired 3 new employees and launched an online store, which quickly gained national traction. Each new success felt like a quiet triumph, a reminder that I didn't just survive Mark's betrayal, I flourished because of it. News about Mark trickled back through mutual acquaintances. He'd tried dating apps, but women his age weren't interested in a middle-aged man living with his parents, and younger women avoided him after hearing about his antics through office gossip. Melissa, who had initially embraced her role as his new beginning, had moved on. She posted cryptic social media updates about learning from mistakes and toxic relationships before quietly removing all traces of Mark from her accounts. Despite all this, Mark hadn't given up his attempts to rewrite history. "He's claiming he was your business partner," my lawyer said during another call. "Apparently, he's convinced himself he played a significant role in the boutique's success." I couldn't help but laugh. Mark's involvement with the boutique had been limited to occasional complaints about my long hours and dismissive comments about my hobby. My lawyer had no trouble dismantling his claims. Detailed records of my personal investments, business expenses, and years of financial independence painted a clear picture. The court dismissed his petition before I even finished presenting the evidence, my lawyer said, clearly amused. Mark's attempts to drag me down only highlighted how unprepared he'd been for the fallout. One afternoon, I received a surprise visit from Melissa herself. She walked into the boutique looking uncomfortable, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow, motioning for her to continue. "I believed everything he told me about you," she admitted. "That you were cold, controlling, unsupportive. But after he moved in with me..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Let me guess," I said, leaning against the counter. "He complained about the size of your apartment, suggested you take out a loan, and promised everything would work out once his big plans paid off?" She blinked, startled. "Exactly," she said. "It's his pattern," I replied. "Big dreams, no follow-through." Melissa hesitated, then said, "I just wanted to say, you were right. About everything. I'm sorry for believing him." Her sincerity caught me off guard, but I wasn't about to dwell on the past. "Thank you," I said simply, before turning back to a display of designer handbags. Mark's family continued to reach out sporadically, but their calls had shifted from accusations to apologies. "You taught us an important lesson," Barbara said during one voicemail, "about enabling bad behavior and making excuses. Mark's still blaming everyone but himself, but we're not defending him anymore." I appreciated the sentiment, but kept my distance. Mark's family wasn't my problem, and I wasn't interested in getting pulled into their drama. As Mark's life continued to spiral, mine kept soaring. Plans for a third boutique location were underway, and my online store had become a steady source of income. I framed one of Mark's old texts, "Have fun with your little shop, at least it'll keep you busy in your old age," and hung it in my office as a reminder of how far I'd come. Beneath it, I placed the business award I'd received that year. Success wasn't just the best revenge. It was proof that I'd always been stronger than Mark gave me credit for. A year after the divorce was finalized, I hosted the grand opening for my third boutique location. The event was a roaring success, attracting local media, customers, and business leaders. But the story they wanted to tell wasn't about my failed marriage. It was about my thriving business empire. Mark's betrayal had become a mere footnote in the narrative of my success. As I mingled with guests, answering questions about my journey and plans for the future, I spotted an unexpected face in the crowd. Melissa. She hovered near the entrance, clearly unsure if she should approach. Eventually, she worked up the nerve and walked over. "Congratulations," she said softly. "This is incredible." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated before continuing. "I know I don't have any right to ask for your time, but I just wanted to say, you were right, about everything." I tilted my head, studying her. She looked younger than ever, or maybe I just felt stronger. "After you froze the accounts, Mark thought my apartment would be temporary," she said, her voice bitter. "He kept saying everything would work out once his investments paid off, or once he got that promotion. But after 2 weeks of him complaining about my closet space and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I realized he wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for another escape." I nodded slowly. "Those weren't his dreams, Melissa. They were distractions. There's a difference," I said. She gave a sad smile. "I know that now. I'm dating someone my own age. We have student loans and a tiny apartment, but at least we're building something real." "Good for you," I said, meaning it. She lingered for a moment, then turned to leave. My assistant manager, who'd been watching from a distance, came over as soon as she was gone. "Was that the girlfriend?" she asked, her curiosity barely contained. "No," I replied, adjusting a display of sunglasses. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did." Over time, the boutique became more than just a business. It became a symbol of resilience. Women came to me not just to shop, but to share their stories and seek advice. Young entrepreneurs, many of them fresh out of college, would ask me how I'd managed to protect myself so effectively. "The best protection is preparation," I often said. And always trust your instincts. I found pride in mentoring others, showing them that they could build something lasting without relying on anyone else. Mark's life continued to limp along, much as I expected. He finally moved out of his parents' house into a small apartment above someone's garage. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that he'd taken a lower-paying job after his company restructured and eliminated his position. He's still telling everyone he's young at heart, Amanda mentioned during one of her visits, but his dating profile pictures are at least 5 years old. I smiled, but said nothing. Mark's life wasn't my concern anymore. 2 years after his infamous text, I was invited to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't betrayal or revenge. It was about building and protecting a successful business. During the Q&A, a woman stood up and asked, "My husband says I'm being paranoid for keeping our finances separate. He says marriage means sharing everything. What do you think?" I didn't even have to think about my answer. "My ex-husband said the same thing," I replied, "right up until he tried to claim half my business in our divorce. Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia." The room erupted in applause, and I couldn't help but smile. By the time the 5-year anniversary of my first boutique rolled around, the business had grown to 5 locations. What started as a little shop now employed over 30 people and had been featured in several national magazines. Mark, on the other hand, was still struggling to rebuild his life. He'd fallen into one scheme after another: online gambling, get-rich-quick plans, and even a pyramid scheme that promised fast returns. None of it worked, of course. "He's still blaming everyone but himself," Barbara admitted during her final call to me. "But we're not defending him anymore. You taught us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them." Her words gave me a sense of closure I hadn't expected. At the anniversary celebration, I stood in front of the crowd, reflecting on how much had changed since that cruel text message. Mark had meant it as the final blow, but instead, it had set the wheels of my success into motion. When the event wound down, I noticed Barbara waiting in the corner. I hadn't invited her, but I wasn't surprised she'd come. "I saw Mark yesterday," she said, smoothing the designer dress she'd purchased from one of my boutiques. "He was talking about his glory days, about the life he could have had. He still doesn't understand that he didn't lose everything in the divorce. He threw it away." I nodded, feeling no bitterness, only relief. Mark's text had been meant to end me. Instead, it became my beginning. 5 years after Mark's infamous text, my life had become unrecognizable, in the best way possible. The boutique empire now spanned 5 locations, with a thriving online store that shipped nationwide. What Mark once dismissed as my little shop was now a multi-million-dollar business. The anniversary celebration of the original boutique had been a roaring success, but as I stood in the quiet of the store after the event, I found myself reflecting on everything that had brought me to this point. Mark's betrayal, though cruel, had forced me to look inward and trust my instincts. It had pushed me to prepare for the worst, to protect what I had built, and to prove, to myself more than anyone else, that I was capable of thriving without him. The following week, I received an invitation to speak at another business conference, this time on a national stage. The topic? Resilience in business and life. The audience was filled with women from all walks of life, entrepreneurs, executives, students, all eager to hear how I had navigated one of the hardest chapters of my life and come out stronger. "I'm often asked if my success was driven by revenge," I began, smiling warmly at the crowd. "I won't lie to you. At first it was. But what I've realized is that the best revenge isn't about proving someone else wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about building a life so full and rich that the pain of the past becomes a mere footnote in your story." Applause erupted, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me there. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard updates about Mark. He was still living in the small apartment above the garage, still bouncing between low-paying jobs, and still blaming everyone else for his misfortune. "He told someone he's just waiting for the right opportunity," Amanda mentioned during a visit to the boutique. "Apparently his glory days are right around the corner." I chuckled, But the truth was, I didn't feel anything for Mark anymore. Not anger, not pity, not even satisfaction. His life was his own to fix or ruin. One afternoon, as I was reviewing expansion plans for a 6th boutique location, Melissa stopped by unexpectedly. This time she looked confident, carrying herself with the poise of someone who had found her own path. "I wanted to thank you," she said, setting a small gift box on the counter. I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For being an example," she replied. "After everything with Mark, I went back to school. I earned my business degree, and now I run my own social media consulting company." I opened the box to find a beautifully designed thank you card and a small bottle of champagne. "You didn't just inspire me," she added. "You showed me that it's okay to demand more, for myself, my work, my life." Her words stayed with me long after she left. Mark's mother called me one last time, not with apologies or updates about him, but with something that felt genuine. "You showed our family a hard truth," she said. "Enabling bad behavior and making excuses doesn't help anyone. Mark still hasn't figured that out, but the rest of us have. That's your legacy, not just for us, but for everyone who's heard your story." Her words made me realize something I hadn't fully acknowledged. My story wasn't just about surviving betrayal. It was about what came next. The strength to rebuild, to grow, to succeed. The boutique chain's continued success was only part of the legacy I was building. My story resonated with women who came to me for advice, and I made it a point to help others protect their dreams the way I had protected mine. One of my favorite pieces of advice? Trust your instincts, protect what you build, and never let anyone make you feel small. As I looked around my flagship store one evening, my eyes landed on 2 framed items in my office, the cruel text that started it all, "Have fun with your little shop," and the business award I had earned that year. They hung side by side, a reminder of how far I'd come. Mark had underestimated me, but he wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. His betrayal had sparked something in me, something that turned pain into purpose. I wasn't just the woman who survived his midlife crisis. I was the woman who turned it into an empire. Story 2. My daughter's future mother-in-law, Linda, laughed loudly and remarked, "Water's good enough for poor folks." Her obscene comment made me nervous, and I questioned whether this was the type of family my daughter was getting married into. Her statements were so unpleasant that I couldn't disguise my unease. Ray, my daughter's soon-to-be sister-in-law, sat close by and turned to face me, her face becoming white. I tried to cover my feelings with a tiny, kind grin. "I'm Sarah Robinson, and this year marks my 51st birthday. For me, life hasn't always been simple. When my daughter Chloe was just 3 years old, I filed for divorce from my former spouse. Our inability to get along was the primary cause of our divorce. No matter how much I attempted to reason with him, he rejected my requests to change, refused to work, and drank most of the time. Even as our financial circumstances worsened, he remained unchanged. I took the painful choice to dissolve our marriage after realizing that neither Chloe nor I wanted that type of life. There was no alimony or child support when we were divorced. It was just Chloe and I against the world after that. I had been a homemaker before the divorce. However, I now had to work to provide for the 2 of us. It was difficult to raise Chloe alone, but I was adamant. In order to be near her, I initially took up menial tasks that I could complete from home. I occasionally made ends meet a day or 2 before payday, but the pay wasn't fantastic and money was usually tight. When I ran out of money, I wouldn't eat. I persisted and made sure Chloe had everything she needed in spite of those difficulties. Chloe developed into an intelligent and mature young lady over time. I finally had some spare time after she graduated and got a job. I made the decision to devote that additional time to something I enjoyed, creating handcrafted goods. I established a tiny business out of my little pastime, and I was surprised to see how successful it was. I felt like my life was improving for the first time in years. Then a beautiful thing occurred. Chloe became engaged. Nathan, the man she had been seeing, was employed at the same firm as her. Her supervisor, Nathan, was 5 years her senior. When Chloe gave me a picture of him, he appeared to be a serious, courteous young guy. That she had selected someone who appeared steady and trustworthy gave me a sense of relief, a far cry from the poor example set by her father. Chloe came over to me one evening after supper, looking anxious. "I need to discuss something with you, Mom." Hesitantly, she said. I noticed her apprehensive tone. "Chloe, what's wrong?" Gently, I inquired. "You appear anxious. Is everything all right?" After a moment of nervousness, Chloe stated, "I'm going to marry Nathan." With a bashful grin, happiness glowed in my eyes. "That's fantastic news." "Chloe, congratulations!" I cried out. She felt a wave of relief. "Mom, I'm very thrilled you're pleased with it." "I was afraid you wouldn't approve," she said. "Why wouldn't I give my approval? Now that you're a grown-up, all that counts is if Nathan brings you joy." I gave a kind response. Chloe smiled and went on. "This weekend, I hoped you could meet Nathan. Before the wedding, I would like you to get to know him. I would definitely want to meet him." I enthusiastically agreed. "Next Sunday, let's make it happen." At home, I awaited the arrival of Chloe and Nathan, a little before 10 in the morning. At the sound of the doorbell, Chloe was standing there with Nathan at her side when I opened the door. "Nice to meet you, Miss Robinson," he said in a courteous greeting. "I'm Chloe's fiancé, Nathan Carter." I was impressed by his politeness right away. "Enter now." "Welcome to the house," I said. Nathan gave me a box of upscale candies as a present as we sat down. After that, he began talking about how he and Chloe met at work. Clearly embarrassed by his enthusiasm, Chloe blushed as he spoke with a warm smile. "Nathan, quit." Playfully nudging him, she said, "You're making me blush." As we watched them together, I felt optimistic about Chloe's future. But when Nathan abruptly inquired, "By the way, is your father at work today?" The happy mood changed. I hesitated for a second at his inquisitive tone. Chloe was pale as I looked at her. She hadn't told him about our family circumstances, I realized. I cleared my throat and chose to take it head on. "I may not have told Chloe, but I'm divorced. I brought her up alone." I gave a quick explanation. Nathan's face turned blank, and his amiable smile vanished. "What's the matter?" I inquired, uncomfortable. Nathan recovered immediately and grinned once again. "Oh, nothing." He told me not to worry about it, but I couldn't help but think about his previous response. Although the remainder of the conference proceeded without incident, I couldn't get rid of the thought that Nathan could be worried about our circumstances. I asked Chloe what Nathan had said about me being a single mother after they had departed. On the drive home, did he say anything? Chloe paused, then answered. "He didn't say much. Mom, don't stress over it." However, I was unable to avoid worrying. What if Chloe's marriage into a single-parent household was frowned upon by Nathan's family? Would they have issues later as a result of this? Time would tell. "Mom." As soon as she entered the room, Chloe yelled. Her face was particularly black, and her voice sounded serious. I realized right away that something was amiss. "What's the deal, Chloe? You appear really distressed," I inquired in worry. It was highly unusual for Chloe to remain silent for a time. I was concerned when I saw her like this since she was typically upbeat and hopeful. More than that, she hesitated for a long moment before speaking, her voice low and uncertain. "It appears that Nathan's family is not really pleased with our marriage, Mom," she remarked, a sorrowful expression on her face. I scowled, perplexed and worried. How come they would feel that way? "What's wrong?" Chloe let out a long sigh, glancing down at her hands. "They ponder. They believe that because we are impoverished and come from a single-parent home, Nathan will struggle." It seemed as if I had just been smacked. Anger and pain squeezed my chest. "It's really awful of you to say that," I remarked, raising my voice a little. "Without ever knowing us, how could they make such a harsh judgment?" Chloe gave a quiet nod. Her expression was growing more dejected by the moment. "Mom, it's more than that." Those were Nathan's mother's precise words, and after a little pause, she continued. "We're only wanting Nathan's money," his sister added. "What?" Startled, I cried out. "It's a terrible charge. I'm not even familiar to them. How could they have such a negative opinion of us?" Chloe muttered, tears welling up in her eyes. Mom, it's so unfair. Their money doesn't matter to me. Like Nathan, I put in a lot of work. Listening to this, I felt terrible for her. Growing up, Chloe had witnessed me working around the clock to support us. As a single-parent family, we had endured a lot, but we had gone so far that we should be humiliated in this way, like we were useless or avaricious. It was quite painful. After calming myself with a long breath, I said, "What did Nathan say about all of this? Did he stand up for you?" Chloe nodded as she glanced up at me. "Yes, he did. He assured them that I had a steady work and that I'm not like that. He even reminded them that I don't really rely on him for financial support because we work for the same firm." I felt a little better after that. "Well, Nathan at least defended you. That's crucial," I said. "It's encouraging as long as he's on your side. But you must be ready, Chloe. After the wedding, things might not change if his family already has this opinion." A few days later, Chloe came over to me once again. Her face was less dejected and more contrite this time. "Mom." With hesitation, she started. "Before the wedding, Nathan's mother proposed that we hold a family gathering." I arched an eyebrow, uncomfortable. "A family gathering? What sort of gathering?" "According to her, it makes sense for you to have a proper meeting with Nathan's parents prior to the wedding," Chloe clarified. She even picked the location, a posh restaurant close to their home. I scowled. What was said about it by Nathan's mother? Chloe let out a sigh. She informed me that since we are not yet legally married, it would be improper for us to meet in their home. She also picked a pretty pricey eatery. Each individual must pay $500 for the supper. I was too shocked to disguise it. $300 for each individual. That's ridiculous. Why would she pick such a costly location? Why doesn't she invite us to stay at her house? People often do that for their families. Welcomes. Chloe seemed ashamed. "Mom, I know you. I find it unpleasant as well. I didn't want to quarrel, though. Nathan even promised to pay us back later if the amount was too high." I was uncomfortable with what she said, but I didn't want to make things more difficult for her. "Okay," I responded at last. "We'll go if it's important to you. But I want you to understand that this isn't typical behavior, Chloe. They're not showing any deference on the meeting's day. I deliberately wore modest clothing. I didn't want Nathan's family to believe that I was ostentatious or irresponsible with money. I only put on a little makeup and dressed simply." Chloe and I were shown to a private room at the restaurant when we arrived. Nathan's family was waiting inside already. Nathan gave us a kind greeting. "I appreciate you being here, Mrs. Robinson. We appreciate you having us." Despite my kind response, I could immediately sense the tension in the room. Ray, Nathan's sister, and Linda, his mother, were sitting rigidly with icy looks on their faces. Michael, Nathan's father, seldom looked at me. They were clearly not pleased to see us. In an attempt to diffuse the situation, I smiled as I introduced myself. "I'm glad to have met every one of you. My name is Sarah." I smiled, but Linda, Chloe's mother, didn't smile back. Rather, she smirked as she sat back in her chair. "I hope everything gets resolved during this meeting. To tell the truth, I believe this marriage is a mistake." I felt sick to my stomach. "Pardon me," I murmured, attempting to remain calm. "Are you from a household with only one parent?" Linda stated plainly. "That's an issue already. Additionally, it's obvious that you're having financial difficulties based on how simple your attire is." Ray laughed next to her. "Poor Nathan," she said sarcastically. "He had the option to wed a respectable person, but instead he remained with a low-income mother and daughter." I felt wrath and shame flood my face. I didn't want them to know how deeply their remarks wounded me. "We might not have much, but Chloe and I have worked hard to build a good life," I responded quietly. "No one's money is necessary for us." Linda gave a harsh chuckle. "It's simple to say that, but don't deeds speak louder than words?" To his credit, Nathan made an effort to step in. "Mom, that's sufficient." He spoke aggressively. Linda just waved him away, despite the fact that Chloe and her mother deserve respect. "I'm just being honest," she remarked. "Chloe's responsibilities will be yours if you marry her. You would be committing a grave error." Their criticisms and insults continued throughout the meeting. For Chloe's sake, I remained kind, but I knew in my heart that this family would never welcome us. I started to fear what Chloe would experience if she married into such a poisonous atmosphere. Rachel's sarcastic remark annoyed me. I resisted, but her remarks were much too offensive for a first encounter. I didn't want to take the chance of ruining Chloe's marriage. I'm sorry. Despite the rage that was bubbling within of me, I whispered softly as I sat down. Nathan's family appeared amused, maybe because I didn't answer their nasty comments. They looked at each other smugly, as if they were having fun putting me down. Nathan's face became stiff as Chloe gazed at me with concern in her eyes. His forehead furrows. Although he hasn't spoken yet, he seems uneasy about his family's actions. However, Linda was obviously in a good mood. She said with excitement, "We have a multi-course meal reserved here. The cost per individual is $500. Really? I'm eager. The food must be amazing because it's so expensive, Rachel said, almost bursting with anticipation. Michael grinned contentedly as he nodded in accord. The workers soon started bringing out the food. With bright and colorful appetizers, each plate was exquisitely presented. This was obviously a fine eating establishment, but all I had was a glass of water when I looked down at my own place setting. Just water, no food. The crew had already left the room when I glanced around in confusion. When I realized what was occurring, my stomach dropped. Nathan saw right away. He was looking at the blank area in front of me with a shocked expression. Rachel, meanwhile, started laughing mockingly. "Look at that, huh? How appropriate." She gave a smirk. Chloe's voice was worried as she drew in closer to me. "Are you all right, Mom?" Before I could answer, she inquired in a low voice. Linda let out a big chuckle. Her voice was harsh. She obviously took joy in making fun of me and remarked that poor people may get by on water alone. Her remarks were so needless and offensive that I was powerless to stop myself. "What does this signify?" I asked, trying to sound cool, but I was furious inside. They didn't even intend to serve me adequately, even though they had invited us to this place. Simply put, it was an insult. Linda gave a shrug. Her smile grew. "Oh, are you not just a poor single mother, but also a moron? Did you honestly believe this place would accept someone like you?" Michael laughed and nodded in agreement with her. "Being a single mother makes you feel humiliated, doesn't it? A lady attempting to live alone after her spouse abandoned her. How pathetic." His comments were brimming with contempt as he added, I tightened my teeth in an attempt to control my rage. My hubby didn't abandon me. Michael cut me off before I could finish. "Yes, of course. Let's be honest, though. No place needs a lady like you." He laughed cruelly and added, "You're just plain flawed and unnecessary." Rachel shook her head and joined in. She mockingly remarked, "I'd hate to end up like Chloe's mother, who works for meager pay and struggles to make ends meet. It's really rather pitiful." After being silent up until this point, Chloe finally said, "I'm very sorry, Mom." Her voice trembled as she spoke gently. I could see how profoundly she was condemning herself for placing me in this predicament, and her eyes were welling with tears. She avoided looking into everyone's eyes and glanced down. That was it. My maximum had been reached. I have to stop allowing these individuals to despise my kid and myself. But before I could respond, Nathan sprang to his feet. "Enough now." His voice reverberated across the private room as he yelled. Anger was hot on his face. "Are you all banding together to attack Chloe's mother in this way? Don't you feel embarrassed about yourselves? For heaven's sake, you are grown-ups." Nathan caught both Chloe's and my attention. His abrupt outburst surprised me. He was obviously angry now, yet he had always appeared cool and collected. But Linda was unconvinced. She continued to smirk as she sat back in her chair. "Oh," she remarked dismissively. "Come on. Poor folks don't need to be defended. Why are you becoming so agitated?" Michael gave a nod of assent. "Don't allow your feelings control you, Nathan." "Oh," he said. "It's simply the reality. It doesn't hurt to point it out." What I was hearing was unbelievable. These folks weren't only impolite. They had no shame at all. I was prepared to defend myself when an unforeseen circumstance occurred. Just as she had been giggling, Rachel stopped abruptly. Her face turned pale as she gazed at me. She mumbled, her hands shaking a little. "No, it isn't possible. Everyone was captivated by her peculiar response. Michael looked at his daughter and scowled. "What's the matter with you? Why are you behaving strangely?" "Confused?" he asked. Even Linda seemed worried. "Rachel. Yours? Ghostly pale. How are you feeling?" Leaning closer, she questioned, but Rachel didn't answer. She continued to look at me. She looked shocked. She paused for a long moment before speaking. "Dad, your business. I believe it's called Glow Crafts." Michael appeared even more perplexed. "It is, of course," he said. "Why do you now bring that up?" Rachel paused, then spoke again, her voice tremulous. "I believe I've already met Chloe's mother at work." Michael shook his head and chuckled. "That isn't feasible. Even the part-timers at my workplace are people I know. She is the only elder lady employed there." The phrase older woman made me scowl, but I refrained, awaiting the next step. Rachel inhaled deeply. "She's not an employee, Dad. She is. She is a customer of our business." There was silence in the room. Michael's expression went from arrogant to perplexed. "What are you discussing?" Even Linda, who had been so self-assured, now uncomfortable. "What does client mean to you? Give an explanation." "Rachel." Rachel turned back to her father after giving me a tense look. "Chloe's mom isn't your typical customer. She is. She is among our most important clientele. She's dressed so simply today that I didn't identify her at first, but now I'm positive." Michael's arrogant look completely vanishes. "What do you say?" His voice was calmer now as he inquired. "Do you mean to say that she is?" I grinned a little, observing how they respond. They appeared to be coming to the conclusion that the individual they had been making fun of might not be as unimportant as they had believed. It seemed natural that Michael wouldn't know me, because I hadn't spoken to him personally before. As I considered this, abruptly, Rachel got up and started to apologize. Chloe's mom. Her voice was shaking as she continued. "I sincerely apologize for everything that happened." The tone in the room changed when she abruptly apologized. Linda and Michael were perplexed, then abruptly upset. "You're sorry. But why?" Linda's voice was abrasive and defensive as she snapped. "Saying apologies to someone so inferior to ourselves is unnecessary," Michael said, gazing at Rachel. "That's right. It's absurd of you to apologize to a poor woman in this way. Do you not take pride in it?" Rachel, however, was unfazed. She looked to her parents. Her face became grave all of a sudden. "Mom, Dad, the mother of Chloe is not Portal. She actually has a lot more money than any of us, especially Dad." Michael's expression contorted in shock. "What are you discussing?" His voice rose as he asked. He gave Rachel a scowl, like though she had gone insane. In contrast, Linda's reaction was one of astonishment. "Just what did you say?" She let out a cry. "You have no right to utter such a ridiculous thing." Rachel was obviously resigned to the circumstances, refused to give up, since it is accurate. Firmly, she said, "The head of a highly prosperous corporation is Chloe's mother. She used to work at my dad's workplace. In the company's reception area, I even brought her tea." Michael's self-assured expression broke as he froze and looked at Rachel. "What? That isn't possible." His voice was suddenly softer, doubtful, yet he still yelled. "Have you heard of Robinson's bags, Dad?" Rachel inquired. Michael's face became white at the sound of the word. He moved his head gently in my direction. There was a mixture of incredulity and horror on his face. I kept my cool and grinned a little. I could tell by Michael's response that he knew the name. But Linda was perplexed. "Robinson's luggage," she whispered, attempting to locate it. Then the understanding struck, and her eyes became wide. "Hold on. Isn't it the brand that's carried by all the upscale department stores? My bag is from there too." As if she needed evidence, she hurriedly picked up the bag she had brought and took a hard look at it. I had to make a remark. "That sack." I smiled calmly as I spoke. "Wasn't that a magazine giveaway? It is a privilege for you to use my brand." Linda was so embarrassed that her face flushed. Unable to look at me, she put the bag back beneath her chair. I took my business card out of my bag at that very time. I gave it to Michael and said hello. "As the president of Robinson's Bags, my name is Sarah Robinson." With shaking hands, Michael accepted the card and gazed at it as though it were a bomb. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish as she bent down to read it. Neither appeared to be able to talk. This was unexpected. At last, Michael spoke in a tremulous voice. "Are you the president?" "Yes, exactly." Calmly, I answered. "We were discussing working together on a new bag line with Globe Crafts. However, I don't think such cooperation will continue given the way you've handled Chloe and me." "How unfortunate." Michael's expression became pale. He stumbled. "Wait, no, you can't cancel the collaboration. At the moment, it is the most significant project we are working on. Should it be canceled, our organization will—" His voice wavered and he paused in the middle of his statement. "What's happening?" Linda inquired, obviously perplexed. She tried to figure out what was going on by glancing between Michael and myself. Michael let out a deep sigh. Now there was urgency in his voice. "In actuality, Globe Crafts is having severe financial difficulties. Because fewer people purchase handcrafted things, sales have been dropping for years. Currently, the market is dominated by low-cost, prefabricated goods. The firm was meant to be saved by this partnership with Robinson's Bags." He faced me. He was now sweating, and his face was pale. He bowed gently and said, "Please, Miss Robinson, I sincerely apologize for my behavior. I implore you to think again." Everyone was taken by surprise when he abruptly apologized. Linda was totally disoriented, while Chloe and Nathan both appeared shocked. "You're apologizing to her, but why?" she made a demand. "I still don't understand how serious the issue is." But Michael's statements didn't affect me. He wasn't sincere in his apologies. It was only an effort to keep himself and his business safe. "Now, I apologize," I replied icily. "Do you really believe that a simple apology would resolve everything after everything you've said to Chloe and me?" The realization that his apology was insufficient caused Michael's face to crumble. He got to his feet in a desperate attempt to save his dignity. Now, clearly uneasy, Linda turned to me and smiled artificially. "Well, you'll forgive us since we're going to be family," she added in a casual, light-hearted manner. Stunned by her boldness, I gazed at her. She went on, "Oh, and since I'm such a big fan of Robinson's Bags, you'll be giving me some products for free, won't you?" Before I could reply, "We are now family after all." At first her remarks were so absurd that I was at a loss for words. I was dumbfounded and just gazed at her, but Nathan would have none of it. "That's totally wrong, Mom," he stated firmly. "You've overreached yourselves." Nathan's harsh tone even appeared to surprise Linda, but she soon recovered, her gaze flitting between him and me. I failed to see the problem with it. In a defensive murmur, she said, "I'm only requesting a minor favor." Nathan shook his head, disappointment visible on his face. He said that this is precisely the reason Chloe and I didn't want to meet in the first place. "All you've done is make fun of her and her mom. I'm embarrassed by your behavior for the first time." Linda seemed truly mortified. Unable to look me in the eye, she looked down at her hands. Michael, however, stayed still and continued to hold on to my business card as though it were his only hope. I inhaled deeply before gently getting to my feet. Respect, not excuses, is what Chloe and I deserve. "Calm but firm," I said, born out of desperation. "The meeting has ended." I turned to face Chloe, who appeared relieved, but still shaky. "Come on," I said softly. We left Nathan's family to clean up the mess they had made as we left the restaurant together, but Linda, who was still indifferent to the situation, commented in a condescending manner. "Why not? I assume there is a plenty of stock. There's no harm in giving away a couple." She was really conceited. Clearly uneasy with her demeanor, Michael and Rachel gazed at her with dismay. I remained calm and gave a solid response. "Giving out our things is not free, especially not to complete strangers. After all, I don't consider you family." Linda seems irritated by my answer, but I take it that Chloe and Nathan are getting married. We are family because of it. Families ought to provide for one another monetarily. Additionally, you are the president of a prosperous business. Are you not? She said this while maintaining a straight face, as though her previous taunts and insults had never occurred. I was taken aback by her boldness. This was her attitude after all the contempt and haughtiness. Her lack of regret for her past actions was now evident. Nathan eventually lost his patience before I could reply. "Mom!" he yelled, his cheeks flushed with rage. "When you learned that Chloe's mother is the head of a corporation, your perspective was totally altered. Do you not feel embarrassed about yourself?" Linda, however, only chuckled. His tirade did not deter him. "It doesn't matter," she shrugged. "A president must be in possession of more money than they know how to spend. Why don't you tell us a little?" Despite her angry remarks, I maintained my composure. Even if Nathan and Chloe end up getting married, I don't intend to establish any kind of relationship with you. Surprised by my answer, I answered calmly. Linda tried to get close to me once again. "Don't say that, please. We'll be family when Nathan and Chloe are married. Giving up a bag or two isn't a huge problem, is it?" Her voice sounded like she was requesting a minor favor. I was about to respond when Nathan intervened. "Mom." He spoke aggressively, staring at Linda. "This has gotten out of hand. You're attempting to take advantage of Chloe's mother after continually insulting her. I'm done." Nathan turned to face me with a distressed look on his face. "I must confess something, Miss Robinson. I kept the fact that you were the president of Robinson's Bags a secret from my parents. If they found out, I knew they would attempt to take advantage of you." Michael had a startled expression. "You were aware? How come you didn't tell me? Had I known?" Nathan cut in, his eyes icy. "If you were aware, wouldn't you have behaved just like your mother, using her position for personal gain?" Angry, Michael's face flushed. "You have no right to talk like way to your parents," he said. "You'll be disowned if you continue like this." Chloe looked between Nathan and his father, perplexed and anxious. Nathan, however, stayed composed. With a heavy sigh, he said, Linda was taken aback. "Why would you say something like that?" she sobbed while trembling. "Following everything that we have done to raise you." Rachel and Michael remained still, unable to react. They obviously didn't anticipate Nathan telling them he was severing his relationship with them. As he went on, Nathan's voice became softer. "I want to always treasure Chloe. I don't need a family that doesn't care about Sarah or her." Linda broke down in tears at hearing this. Rachel and Michael simply stood there in awe. Finished. They had brought it upon themselves, yet it was obviously painful for them to lose their cherished kid, I remarked, grinning a little as I gazed at them. "Live with your regrets. You'll have difficulties in the future, I'm sure." Nathan's remarks gave Chloe more confidence, so she said firmly, "We won't even tell you if we have children." Her remarks were sharp as a blade. Linda sobbed, "Please don't do it to us." But despite their entreaties, Chloe refused to back down. "Chloe?" Together, Nathan and I walked out of the restaurant. The very following day, I found out that Michael and Rachel had been let go from Globe Crafts. The head of the firm attempted to get me to change my mind after I told him that I wanted to end the cooperation. I didn't waver. I couldn't work for a firm that has employees that can act in such a contemptuous manner. I clarified that upon learning of Michael and Rachel's actions, the president, who had a daughter around Chloe's age, became enraged, and key partnership that may have salvaged the faltering business had been wrecked by their activities. The lives of Michael and Rachel got challenging after they were fired without warning. It was almost hard for Michael, who was already older, to get a new job. Rachel couldn't get a job either, even though she had only worked part-time because of her father's connections. Housewife Linda had no source of income and was no longer receiving Nathan's assistance. They came to my business in despair months later. "They pleaded with you to work with Globe Crafts. The president will rehire us if you do. If a partnership isn't possible, at least provide financial assistance. Our family is going through hardship." Considering how they had previously treated Chloe and me, their cries were pitiful. "Families support one another." With a quivering voice, Linda said. After demeaning us and calling us impoverished, I couldn't help but chuckle. "All of a sudden, you are families," I said icily. "Financial help and collaboration are not feasible. Additionally, Nathan has already broken off contact with you, as you are aware. Leave now, please." However, they remained still, attempting to hold on to any hope. At last, I firmly threatened to call the police if you didn't leave right away. Michael became frightened upon hearing this. No, please, we'll leave. We will never return. As he spoke, he dragged Linda along. Their clothing was filthy and old, an obvious indication of their deteriorating circumstances. Irony prevailed. They used to mock those who were impoverished, but now they were experiencing it themselves. I subsequently learned that Rachel suddenly lost her ability to get employment and advance in life. Her days were filled with hopelessness. Her future is dismal. It has been 3 years since then. Nathan, Chloe, and I now share a home. On the other hand, newlyweds frequently live alone. Nathan was adamant. In my opinion, Chloe is safer with you in case something goes wrong. Nathan assists Chloe with housework, despite his hectic work schedule. I sincerely appreciate how kind he is. One day, Chloe came over to me looking serious. She said, "Mom," which made me nervous. "Is everything all right?" Nervously, I inquired. Then a happy smile spread across her face. "It appears that I will soon become a mother." With a gentle pat on her stomach, she declared. Happiness filled my heart. "That's fantastic, Chloe." "Well done," I remarked, giving her a firm embrace. As I saw our joyful future together with a grandchild on the way, Nathan stood next to her, grinning lovingly. My face lit up with a spontaneous smile. I have faith that as a family, we will overcome any obstacles that may arise. Story 3. My name is Kelly. This year, on a summer day when the cicadas were singing, I celebrated turning 35. "Ma'am, I was called to the president's office." President, that is. "What is it?" "I've made the decision to turn the business on to your sister. You are thus dismissed as of right now," my mother said. As she fannied herself, the president, who had a beautiful profile, turned to face me, seemingly worried by the heat. Because of how strong the sunlight was flowing in through the window, I was momentarily unable to determine whether this was genuine. "What?" I think my tone was idiotically black. "Did you not hear me?" my mother replied, giving me a frustrated look. "You've been fired. This place no longer needs you. Before the conclusion of the current month, get out." As she spoke, she shut off her fan and turned back to the papers on her desk, as if she had finished her work. I was by myself in the president's office, and the sound of cicadas filled the air while I listened softly to her remarks. "Are you still present?" "My mother told me to go back to work." I said, "Pardon me," as I backed away automatically, closed the door, and stepped out into the hallway. We operated a small, 2-story company with maybe 10 employees, all of whom were involved in demolition. It was a family-run business. Almost all the power was with my mother. The president was her. The managing directors were my mother's cousin and her husband, and the vice presidents were my aunt and her husband. After high school, I worked at an accounting business. My mother asked me, "Are you going to leave your family in trouble?" when I was 25. "There isn't an accountant here. You'd be the last to suffer." Sort of. I was pulled into the group by her. I was also assigned additional domestic chores and secretarial responsibilities, in addition to accounting. Everything was thrown at me by my mother. When we were short-staffed, I was sent out on sales calls. As a result, I was essentially a multi-talented employee. Despite this, I worked hard from morning till night so as not to bother others, and I managed to finish the assignment in 10 years. Samantha, however, was guaranteed the company and was 3 years younger than me. She was 32 years old and had only been with our company for 2 years. Before joining us, Samantha changed jobs and grumbled a lot, saying, "It just doesn't suit me. I can't work for such low pay," she groaned. "There's a suitable work for you, Samantha," my mother said, in response to her spending her days lying around the home without even trying to get another employment after her 30th birthday, when job circumstances tightened. My mother then agreed to let Samantha serve as our company's managing director. I remained a regular employee even after 10 years of employment. The disparity in treatment of us sisters shocked others around us. However, I thought it was only a coincidence. That's because my mother has always given precedence to my sister, even when we were small. "Samantha, you're so cute," she remarked. "Buying this gorgeous girl everything she needs, including clothing and toys. You look fantastic with this outfit, but I was informed that this is plenty for you. I didn't understand why I was treated this way when I was younger, and I was given hand-me-downs by relatives and kids from the neighborhood since I wasn't as cute. All I wanted was attention from my mother. I made the decision to put my studies and assisting others ahead of my unalterable beauty. But my mother didn't appear to care about me. Before stamping my report card, which was filled with all A's, she hardly glanced at it. I even considered having plastic surgery, if the only way to get someone's affection is to be gorgeous. My aunt realized my situation while I was in high school and gave me an explanation for my mother's lack of interest in me. I was told that my father had passed away, but in reality, he had escaped with a woman from the firm the year Samantha was born. In contrast to my mom, there was something about this older, less attractive woman that made me think of myself. "Your mother is very proud," my aunt said. She therefore found it incomprehensible that her spouse had been taken by an older and less attractive lady. However, she seemed to grin as if to say, "Serves her right." Furthermore, I look a lot like my aunt, who is my mother's sister. It's not very pretty, but it's also not ugly. She was self-assured and performed her duties mostly due to her charm, even if she also caused me anguish. When my father left when he was 32, my mother took over the company from my late grandfather. She took use of her beauty to boost sales and attract new clients. As more and more buildings neared the end of their useful life, demolition became unavoidable. Therefore, my aunt and her husband, as well as my mother's cousin and her husband, held her in high regard. However, it has lately been impossible to strike a balance between demolition fees and real expenses due to the escalating costs of transportation and disposal of industrial trash. The performance of our firm has been deteriorating, which is a prevalent problem in the industry. To be honest, it has been quite difficult to make the monthly payroll. As Samantha began working for the firm around this period, I started to worry about how we would pay her. My mom then threatened to take money out of your paycheck to cover her expenses. We're a family, so it makes sense. I reasoned that even if you cut my income, it won't be enough to pay the managing director. "It's your job as a veteran to figure it out," she said firmly. "Simply do it," I muttered, tentatively. "Samantha ought to begin as a regular employee." My mother reacted and gave me a stern look. "To whom are you speaking? You have no right to say that." We shared a home at the time, but Samantha made no financial contributions. Well, each month I paid $1,500. Naturally, Samantha didn't make any financial contributions at home even after she started working for our firm. As I was growing up, I handled the housework because my busy mother was unable to do it on her own. Samantha, however, did nothing and pretended that it was merely normal. "Isn't dinner ready yet, sis?" When I was working overtime, she would inquire. To get me to dinner quickly, Samantha would phone. "I'm at work. Hello. Why don't you simply manufacture it yourself?" "What should I make?" I asked. "You're in charge of the kitchen, right? I don't want to get reprimanded for using it without authorization. Remember how you were upset the last time?" She mentioned a problem with yard pests, not trying to cook in the end. Samantha usually doesn't tidy up or put things back where they belong. It appears that she is still upset with me for bringing this up once previously. In other words, she uses that as justification for her stance of doing nothing. I would reluctantly go back to the workplace to work extra after returning home to prepare dinner. After that, even on days when there was food available, my mother would frequently eat whatever she wanted and hardly ever made supper. Rather, my mother started bringing Samantha out for work more often lately, so I didn't have to make supper as much. However, we are still having problems this year with the expenses of these excursions. After turning 63, my mother began to complain more about her body's aches and pains and the effects of heavy drinking. During that period, I was summoned to the president's office and informed that Samantha would be taking over the firm. Therefore, as of right now, you, the ugly duckling, are dismissed. My mother's decision to give Samantha the president made reasonable in light of her previous behavior. In retrospect, Samantha is 32 years old, which is the same age my mother was when she was elected president. My mom could have believed Samantha could exploit her attractiveness to draw customers, just like she had, but I just couldn't put up with the thought of getting fired for my appearance. I didn't think there would be much of a gain, even if Samantha received my pay. It seems that word of Samantha's appointment as president had already gotten out among the staff when I spoke with my aunt about it. How perhaps it's connected, but that's because Samantha's work was so shoddy that people stopped asking her. Yes, my aunt answered. Samantha struggled to meet deadlines. Her work was full with mistakes, and she frequently made messed-up phone calls. The males in her immediate vicinity had filled in for her despite her lack of abilities, maybe due to her attractive appearance. My aunt was also aware of this. Well, that's true, she remarked, adding with a heavy sigh, but she probably thinks you're in her way. Oh dear, I can't believe she's firing you. That would destroy our business. However, she was unable to resist because of her tendency to not challenge my mother. Being biologically linked to my mother, sister, and this untrustworthy aunt made me feel disgusted. In a gloomy tone, I added, so both my mother and my sister dislike me. My aunt took a while to respond. You might be better off working somewhere else, but certainly your mother is tough. You're too strong not to start anew elsewhere. As she gave me the resignation advice, there was a little twinge of connection in her eyes. I dimly saw a mirage in the distance while standing in the company of people who were red from the summer evening. Perhaps it was time to call it quits. I turned to my aunt as a feeling of freedom went through my chest. For the first time since I started working for the firm, I grinned composedly. My aunt, taken aback by my smile, gave it back with a dejected look. The rest of my days were occupied with collecting everything and creating handover documentation that anyone could comprehend. My last day came toward the end of the month before I realized it. At the end of the day, I could no longer hear the cicadas as I headed to the president's office. My sister and mother were having a good time talking and laughing. There's little doubt that salesperson has feelings for you. Do you recognize that bald man? Of course. No. It wasn't until I purposefully coughed that everyone started laughing. Samantha asked, "What's up?" With a perplexed expression. "Dinner is not necessary today. My last day here is today. I appreciate all you've done thus far." Was that today, I wonder? I completely forgot. When they realized I wouldn't have to see their faces anymore, they started laughing again. Gave me a sense of renewal. "Please be careful, as I'm also leaving the house," I said. My mother gave me a robotic yes as I bowed. "I appreciate all of your hard work." I heard my sister's voice as Lee shut the door behind me, indifferent. "We will no longer have to look at that obnoxious face. Observe me." As I walked out of the firm where I had spent many years working, I grumbled to myself. 1 week later, after completing some paperwork at school, I looked at my phone and saw that my mother had missed 14 calls in 2 hours. I placed my phone on silent mode and completed a few additional errands before going home since I had a horrible feeling. My mother kept making calls, and by the next morning, there were 80 in all. Just after 2 a.m., the final call was placed. I didn't intend to call her back, of course. Now that I didn't know her, I didn't want to hear her voice for fear that I might give in to her pressure once more. My mother had dominated me for 35 years in an attempt to release me from her authority. I could have blocked her, but instead I chose to ignore her calls entirely. I didn't examine the calls since I wanted proof in case she did anything compulsive. There were about 100 calls every day for a time. Checking the missed calls was first discouraging. However, as I became accustomed to it, I started to feel afraid and deceived, seeing my mother struggling without me. I became really aware of how badly she had treated me at that point. It has been a year since then. My mother had stopped calling by then, and I was clueless about her whereabouts. I took a correspondence course for tax accountants and worked a variety of temporary jobs during the past year, passing the test with success. The variety of responsibilities and my previous job experience, I managed my mother's business and developed my managerial skills, which helped me in my new role. Owned a large accounting company. It wasn't until recently that I began to value the past for giving me these abilities. My coworkers at the new job were all kind, and we supported one another as we worked. Quite different from the times when I had to do all the research and work by myself till midnight. I once went past the building on my way to a client close to my mother's workplace. The houseplants I had been caring for were utterly wilted, and the windows and entryway were distinctly unclean. I suddenly ran across my mother leaving the workplace on the way back. When she saw me, she said, "Oh." They came up to me out of reflex, thinking I would get reprimanded. I put my bag over my face, but she approached me with a voice that was surprisingly loving. My goodness.